This video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. With Phase 2 of Wrath Classic and Ulduar now confirmed to be dropping on January 19th, we don't have long to wait until we go back and see one of World of Warcraft's most legendary raids ever for a second time, or perhaps a first time for many. And whether you're totally new to the content or you did it back in the day, things will be different this time around. With final patch class balance, pre-nerf content and buffed item levels throughout the raid, Ulduar in Classic stands to be an experience that should offer something new for everyone, which makes me personally look forwards to it even more. So today I wanted to go over a few things you may not have thought about yet for Ulduar, because whilst there's a lot to look forwards to, I think it's going to be quite the reality check in terms of a step up in difficulty. I know it's been a massive meme since Classic has existed, hasn't it? Okay guys, Blackwing Lair was easy, just wait for AQ40. Okay, never mind, that was easy too, but Nax, barely anyone cleared Nax 40 back in the day. Oh wait, it turns out that playing on 7 FPS and dial-up internet without any guides kinda makes things harder than they should have been. This was also the case in TBC, which saw some of its own progression points, such as pre-nerf Lady Vash and Kael'thas in Tier 5, as well as plenty of bosses in the Sunwell, especially Muru. And let me tell you, if you progressed on those, you will be progressing in Ulduar, and for a lot longer. And whilst it's no mythic difficulty from retail, many of the hard modes will be very challenging in early levels of gear. So let's set some expectations for this new raid. What should you be doing, what to think about, and how best to prepare. But first, hashtag ad. Did you know Raid Shadow Legends is a hero collection RPG on PC and mobile played by over 80 million players across the world? Waiting for the train? Commuting? Turn your downtime into uptime with amazing graphics and over 650 unique customizable champions. Take on bosses, battle real players, develop strategies all your way. What I like about Raid Shadow Legends is the amount of team combinations you can put together to take on any encounter the game offers. Strategizing a team and seeing it work in practice is always a satisfying experience for me. With the new year comes a new champion inspired by pro wrestling star Ronda Rousey, who you can unlock for free by playing over 7 days between now and February 20th. Ronda has multi-hit skills, great for encounters where AoE matters. Her second skill locks both active and passive skills, making her perfect for shutting down enemies in PvP content. And her third skill is a powerful AoE attack combined with immunity to all turn meter reductions. Use special promo code RAIDRONDA in-game to also get a bunch of helpful stuff like a 3-day 100% XP boost, 500k silver, and 5 full energy refills. You can also use the link in my description to download the game and receive even more bonuses. Many thanks to Raid Shadow Legends for the sponsor today. Let's get back to WoW. I want to start off with some things you can think about before the patch has dropped. Top of that list has to be consumables and getting the most out of them. Whilst Wrath of the Lich King doesn't need you to bring a dozen different potions and elixirs like Classic did, there's going to be a lot more wiping and a lot more going through consumables at a rapid rate. Bring more than you need, because chances are there's somebody else in your raid that's brought less than they need. You know what your class will need by this point in time, or you can go and check it out on a guide, but not having a mana potion on a healer or running out of DPS potions will start to add up if enough people go dry. Speaking of dry runs should make a return. If you didn't PTR, which barely anyone did, let's be honest, you're going to be going into this content for the first time in a very long time. And quite a few fights need a few attempts just to see the mechanics through in real time. Guides are good and all, but that first-hand experience is vital. Dry runs are an attempt where essentially you don't have to use consumables. These were quite the thing in Nax 40 due to vanilla needing so many consumables. It's less of an issue nowadays, but still there's no use throwing gold away. You should also know who's putting down feasts, because trust me, you're going to be getting through a lot of them, and again, there's no point wasting them when one can buff the entire raid. Also with Ulduar, there will be many more DPS check bosses than, well, anything in Classic kind of ever. And when DPS matters, pre-potting matters. It's Wrath of the Lich King, you only get 1 potion during combat now, and everyone using a potion before you enter combat to trigger the cooldown will make the difference now and again. I'm just saying, if you're progressing Hodia hard mode and a bunch of you forget to pre-pot, you will start to be called out about it. Do yourself a favor, find somewhere to keybind your potion and make a habit of popping it before a fight begins. Of course, not every fight needs a pre-pot or is a strict DPS check. Freya is an example where the start of a fight there's literally no point pre-potting to hit the boss, you're just waiting for the first ad wave. You might actually prefer to have a health potion handy in some fights instead if you struggle with certain mechanical overlaps. Also, keybind your health stone, it's on a separate cooldown from potions, it's gonna save you now and again on sketchy fights such as Mimron. If you die without popping your health stone, not a good look. Next, I want to talk about upgrades, the best new bit of raids for many players, and Ulduar is full of them. But before you get into the raid, don't forget that you will want to be doing your daily heroic dungeon again. With the new patch is a new emblem of conquest, which will begin dropping, and similar to emblems of valor, these can be turned in for tier pieces or 25-man normal quality items. The heroic daily is going to give you 2 of these emblems. There's also the new dungeon difficulty, Titan Rune Dungeons. The daily heroic on Titan Rune difficulty will also drop a bag at the end, which will contain a further 3 emblems of conquest, or it should do if they haven't changed it from how it worked on the beta at least. I'd consider running this with guildies to be honest, because everyone wants to do the daily now, and with the guild you can at least rotate who gets the bag or give it to the person who's going to benefit the most from getting upgrades earlier. And when you are in Ulduar and you get an upgrade, there's no reason not to have the ability to equip it right away. You can pre-prepare enchanting vellum or just carry the materials to get items enchanted by a guildie, carry whichever gems, meta gems and so on your class uses, as well as the various shoulder and head enchants, and engineering tinker materials. The upgrades are a big deal, just make sure you can make the most of them straight away. Finally, for upgrades, the dreaded BIS list. So a lot of guilds these days run a loot council who will decide the fate of those purple items your raid gets. And believe me, when you see loot in Ulduar, even on 10-man normal mode, kinda just everything is an upgrade. If you go for a BIS list, which is your literal best in slot, it's going to contain nearly entirely loot from hard modes and Algalon. Now honestly, do you think your guild will be clearing that content anytime soon? I'll be getting onto bosses and recommendations in a moment, mind you, but for many players it might take a long time to fully clear, which is fine. But if you have your eyes set on the Giga BIS item and it's from Algalon 25, you might just be waiting a very long time for that. I mean, it might be months if they don't nerf anything. What I'm saying here is have a good idea what your options are, not just your mega BIS item, which by the way, about half a dozen other people will also want because that's how loot is in Classic. Know your top 3 or so items. When something drops and you can say, I will wear this until X drops, that's gonna look better than Jimmy, who's just been rolling main spec upgrade on absolutely everything. If you like getting purples and items, it's kind of in your interest to learn the loot. I know this is all pretty keen, but it works. Also, expect your raid, if they're doing a loot council focused on progression and hard modes, to just by default favor certain specializations and classes. It's going to be a rich get richer environment where the top performers see the best loot earliest. This is what happens when progression is part of the content. Speaking of progression, we have the progression within the instance. So without a doubt, and I really can't overemphasize this, one of the most important things about progression raiding is good wipe recovery practices and raid pacing. Know when your raids breaks are going to be in advance so people aren't trying to AFK after a wipe because they need to do something. If people know when you're going to take a break, they'll wait to the break, unless they can't. If you wipe, get back in as soon as possible and be ready to go again. If you're the guy who's sitting on the floor after every wipe and you're not even AFKing, you just don't want to run back, you're not going to be very popular. And above all, recognize when you are going to wipe. At some point, you're going to know the mechanics of a boss. It's just a question of getting in a good pull. Certain fights have failure points. Does your tank die on the transition to the final phase of Iron Council hard mode? That's a wipe, there's no point continuing. Storm Clouds somehow end up on a bunch of healers on Hodia hard mode. If it's your first kill, that's probably a wipe. And when a wipe is called, it's like a real life boss mechanic. Get it done fast, get back in the raid, go again, do better. Also have a soulstone rotation on people for fights too, it helps a lot. You'll want to build these practices because when you eventually get to Algalon, you're only going to have 1 hour per week on the boss. You have to make that hour count. Saying all that, remember that despite this constant talk of hard mode and how difficult everything will be, that's up to you and your guild. Sure, it gives the better loot because it's harder, it has the achievements and so on, but 10 and 25 man normal mode exist for a reason. In fact, back in the day, Blizzard quite specifically designed raiding tiers in terms of difficulty, from the easiest being 10 man normal, then 10 man hard mode, then 25 man, and finally the hardest being 25 man hard mode. And 10 man normal Ulduar drops gear better than anything available in tier 7, at least from an item level point of view, so definitely don't neglect at least attempting to clear all the available content on week 1. It's kind of a pain to do, but splitting your raid into 2 10-man groups is extremely beneficial long term. And you borderline kind of want to be doing this before combining forces into 25 man to take on the real challenge. There's the obvious upside of more players getting gear upgrades, but it will also mean your raid is getting to terms with boss mechanics faster. A smaller group places more responsibility on the individual, and people are more likely to be hit by boss mechanics. Basically, if you haven't seen Ulduar in forever, 10-mans are a pretty good place to learn. And of course, just to confirm in case you were wondering at all, you can still do 10 and 25 man in the same lockout, but you can only kill each boss once regardless of the difficulty. So if you did XT 10-man normal, you can't do XT 10-man hard mode in the same lockout, but you can still attempt XT 25-man on either normal or hard mode, as it's on a separate lockout. Once you have seen 10-man and want to move on and up to 25, I would prioritize certain bosses over others. In terms of hard modes to attempt week 1, I would put them in several different tiers. The easier hard modes include Flame Leviathan, Thorim, and Freya. Honestly, for a lot of guilds week 1, despite it being one of the easier hard modes, I wouldn't spend time on Flame Leviathan hard mode. Chain wiping and learning the first boss just doesn't make sense to me unless you have many raid dates planned. I think you want to get some good momentum moving into the raid by taking on some of the easier fights or fights without hard modes and guaranteeing yourself some nice upgrades. Thorim and Freya are both good progression points week 1, since by the time you can access either of them, you can also access every boss in the instance bar 3, meaning you can go elsewhere if you want to break from these bosses. Both are required for Algalon later on whenever you get to that. On top of that, these fights are a mix of mechanical and DPS checks rather than just the latter. The harder week 1 hard modes are Iron Council, Hodir, and Mimron. Iron Council simply has a very high DPS check. It's doable in tier 7 gear and will be greatly helped if you've run 10-man Ulduar, but it's still quite challenging to pull off. Hodir is similar. A pure DPS check boss needs to be defeated within 2 minutes, though there are quite a few mechanics that go into boosting the raid's DPS to making this possible. Finally, Mimron. True to his nature, he's a highly mechanical fight that punishes mistakes really hard. You need a good amount of pulls and for everyone to be on the same page for this boss to be going down. The avoid hard modes for week 1 are XT, it's just not worth the effort basically. We're talking about 25 man here of course. He was the only boss to actively get nerfed during the PTR and he's still really difficult. He literally gatekeeps Ulduar and the rest of the bosses, and you don't need him for Algalon. Just come back to this one later. The second avoid I'd say is Vezax. It's kind of a bit more optional, this one. Similar kind of story to XT. It's not like he got nerfed during the PTR or anything. It's just very challenging numbers wise and may not be the best time investment for most guilds out there week 1. The bosses with a bit more options and flexibility are Yogg-Saron. Since you can choose how many keepers you're going to bring, you can scale the fight to what you would like to do. Remember that bringing 1 keeper, which is much easier than 0, still drops the best loot. 0 lights or 0 keepers is only for the achievement and the mount. I think Yogg 1 will be a good progression point for guilds week 1. And finally, not to forget Algalon, though to even get there you need to have defeated Iron Council and all the keepers on hard mode, so if you can do it you might as well go and give it a try for 1 hour. All in all, for progression, don't overlook 10-man raiding. Know your raid's time investment, don't get yourself hard stuck on a hard mode. It's better to have seen every boss than to have spent half a raid night on something that you just don't have the DPS to do. Remember, every bit of loot will get you closer to those hard mode bosses eventually, and at the end of the day raiding is a team effort. Sure, it's all in a game and everything, but being on the same page as your group and getting down hard mode bosses for the first time will feel all the better if you go in with good practices across your raiding group. And that's all from me today. Best of luck in Ulduar, may the RNG be kind and the loot plentiful. As always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.